opportunity.
So true. So true. In terms of policy, right? You're also part of EPG, Economic Policy Group. Let's talk about EPG now. So you, Bridge India and EPG together runs this India Week, and I was there, and I've seen, witnessed how powerful it is. So my takeaway from that India Week last year was like so much learning. As I said, like, what's going to happen next was a question. So for me, when I sat in those like conference rooms for 2 days, the one thing I was looking at is like, will it be a mini, World Economic Forum
Mm,
in some
mm,
time?
mm,
Probably for India and UK alone, instead of like having everyone.
mm.
I mean, is it too much to ask for? Is it a good wish?
Well, that I'll leave to the powers that be to see if they if we get some luck to make it into that kind of big forum. But I think certainly there's growth year on year. So this year we'll have very significant growth compared to what we had last year because we've had more time to plan. Um, and there's some collateral we can use from last year to say that we delivered these things. Um, and I was one of the best moments from me from last time was a principal secretary of one of the ministers that came subsequently. So the event was on a Thursday and a Friday, and then I think on the Monday, or maybe on the Sunday, he tweeted out something along the lines of, "I've been on lots of foreign trips. This was the most productive one for me."
Brilliant.
Usually, when somebody tweets that, it's a communications person who's written the tweet and is forcing that person to share it. This time, we had no idea that went out, so it was a completely genuine thing.
Surprise. Good surprise to you.
It was a very good surprise, and so I think things like that are what we aim for, and I think as long as we do, instead of that happening once, if we do that 10, 15 times every year, then automatically we'll grow and attract the right kind of crowd, not just from India but from outside. I mean, last year Ragurajan came from Chicago to come to this, and we had 2 or 3 people that came from UAE, a couple that came from Germany. Um, so I think slow and steady, I think we'll get there.
Yeah. So what's in for UK? We spoke about India a lot from the beginning. All the conversation went on the lens from India, but it's Bridge India, right? It's between two countries, and you're here. You're representing UK. I mean India as well, but yeah, you're UK
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
So what's in for UK in this whole spectrum of things happening?
I think one really interesting thing in how the UK and India liaise with each other is that uh, when the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi came to power in 2014, the UK was not one of the 5 or 6 or 7 countries he visited first. It was maybe in the top 10, just about. But France was before that, Spain was before that, the US was earlier than that, Middle East too. And that set the tone for how the UK is perceived, maybe in the current government in Delhi, in terms of its importance. Subsequently, we've seen in the discussions around the free trade agreement, potential free trade agreement,
Mm.
as well as various migration agreements, is that the UK has been much more willing to give to India than maybe before. So 20 years ago, India was very much a junior partner in this relationship. Today, that's not the case because after Brexit, the economic growth potential of the UK has fallen permanently. Um, and COVID, as well as before that, the 2008 financial crash has meant uh, Britain has a higher debt to GDP ratio than at any time since the Second World War. So Britain needs more allies in terms of trading and investment relationships. So I think the UK needs to be a lot smarter about how it works with India. Migration is a case in point where when Theresa May was Home Secretary, lots of colleges across the UK were shut down because there were uh, too many illegals coming and staying, not just from India, but from Pakistan, Nigeria. These were the 3 big countries. Um, Post COVID, Britain opened its doors completely to student migration as well as health and social care visas. Um, and now suddenly Britain is saying actually that was an overreach and let's scale it down again. So this fairly random change in policy uh, It happens in different countries as ministers change and priorities change. But for a country that's an old power like Britain, for it to happen not just in one area, but in many areas, it looks like Britain doesn't know what it's doing.
Mm.
Um, and so Britain, I think, can achieve a lot more from the relationship with India rather than just having open doors and welcoming
True.
more
So
Indian
true.
immigrants. But I think Britain needs to first decide what it wants, and part of that, I think, and this has been out of favor as a term for a long time in Britain, is having an industrial strategy. So if you have an industrial strategy and you say, this is how we want to create jobs in the UK, this is the kind of industry you want in the UK, which has been lost before, and we want to bring it back, or at least slow the decline in some industries,
Yeah.
then you can say, well, now this is the education requirement. Now this is the unskilled or skilled labor requirement, and then from that, all your conversations with other countries follow.
Mm.
Right now, it looks like the economy conversation, the migration conversation, the student conversation are being run by different wings of the current government, and they're not cohesive.
So do you think that they're not talking to each other as much they need to?
I'm sure they are. I mean,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. The government is full of very smart people,
Mm.
but I think when you have so much change so often, we've had 5 prime ministers in
So
the
true.
last 5 or 6 years. Uh, we've had something like 17 housing ministers, 11 education ministers, 4 or 5 chancellors just in the last 4 or 5 years. When so much change happens, inevitably there will be a lack of continuity.
This is something never happened in Britain before.
Yeah.
So kind of change. Yeah, I know. I mean, one good outcome for Indians is like having Indian Prime Minister after all this, which is a good thing. So how do you think the relationships are strengthened? I mean, did that change anything at all in the
Because of
mindset
having
of
an Indian prime
Indian
minister.
Prime Minister?
I think it's more of a signaling mechanism. I
Okay.
think Rishi Sunak is very much he's a British prime minister.
Yeah.
He
So
happens to be Indian, but he's prime minister of Britain. There have been some signaling things. So, for example, he's worn a Rakhi,
yeah,
and that's been
he
in
went to the
several
temple
videos.
Akshardham when he was in India.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he went to a katha of a Gujarati priest in Britain with somebody from the House of Lords that took him, and then various other conservative councillors. So that resonated, and I think that was not because of political messaging. I think that
Mm.
was something, even if he wasn't in the limelight as prime minister, he would have done anyway.
True. So true.
So I think it's very important to be true to yourself as somebody in senior leadership position. So I think the fact that he's able to do these things and he's able to articulate what he stands for in that part of his life, I think is really important as a signaling mechanism. Of course, there's other parts of his day job where he has various other pushes and pulls, so he's not able to articulate um, maybe what he would want to articulate had he been dealt different cards.
Yeah. So, but himself as a finance minister before, like as chancellor, what do you call it as, right? Versus being a prime minister now, his progress back then, like the way he's been applauded for his work, probably not happening. I mean, at least we're not seeing that much at the moment. Probably, yeah. There's a rough road for him,
Hmm.
but he's doing as much as he can.
The best day in his professional life was when he became prime minister. It's been downhill since then.
I know. So one thing I have noticed in the Indian diaspora, right? I am part of various Indian diasporas. In the recent, we had this celebration, and when the discussions were around, like what is that, Indians living in UK adding value to the UK economy, and there's like number of percentages and all. The various numbers were coming up. There were like people saying 6% of economy is run by Indians. There were people saying 10%.
Hmm.
So I'm not, I don't know how much it is. Do you want to share something about like what's the value that Indian origin people are adding to economy here?
Yeah. So I think I want to split that up into 2 or 3 different waves of Indians.
Okay.
So, for example, there's been a wave of Indians in the 60s and 70s that came from East Africa.
Okay.
So, 1971, 72,
72
there was
Ugandan thing. Yeah.
exactly
Okay.
Uganda and then other parts of East Africa. And they're now in the third and fourth generation. So, they've established themselves very well.
Okay.
And the newer generations have progressed to more professional jobs. So, initially, maybe it was trading and selling things because they weren't as educated. But now it's more professional jobs. Rishi Sunak's an example.
Yeah.
You know, he's stood on the shoulders of his parents' hard work to be able to get to where he
Yeah.
is. And it's a very classic immigrant story, not just an Indian story. But then subsequently, for example, in the last 10 years, the immigration has been more around professionals that have come, the
Mm.
consulting sector, IT sector, banking sector. And their relationship with Britain is different to how the fourth generation of the East African migrants relate to Britain. Um, and I think I would answer that question not just with the numbers, because um, Britain's richest family is Indian.
Yeah.
The Hindujas, Lakshmi Mittal is there, Anil Agarwal is there in the top 10 as well. Um, the deputy mayor for business in London was until recently Indian. Um, and likewise, we've got other South Asians in government and in opposition in Scotland, as well as in Ireland. So I think that South Asian contribution is definitely been there. But rather than look at the numbers, I would say it's more about adding to the cultural fabric and the
Mm.
social fabric. In the 1970s, when the first big wave came, people would live in cramped accommodation. Uh, they would not be able to go into areas where there were more white people. At school, at the workplace, there was discrimination. Um, Whatever we say today about DE&I in the corporate workplace, um, it is significantly better on every single metric without question
So
for
true.
today's generation than it has ever been in human history or British history.
So
Um,
there's more inclusion now.
there's more
There's more equity.
inclusion.
Yeah.
If you want to be something, you can be something today
Okay.
based on merit. Um, and I think more importantly, or as importantly as well, uh, in the city traditionally, the old boys network has ruled. So if your dad was in insurance, you'd get an insurance job or in banking, etc. For successive immigrant communities, uh, they've had to be better than
Mm.
uh, the, their local competitor, and they've not had that network to be able to fall back on, that
Mm.
old boys network. But now, because Indians have been here for such a long time, that is now changing. It's maybe not changed for the newer set of migrants that have come in the last 10 years and working in professional fields,
Mm-hmm.
because then you're part of a corporate hierarchy. But it's certainly true for older waves of migrants who are now able to open doors for other people. And I think that's where the real power lies in a diaspora that's well educated, has very low crime rates, uh, values contributing to the local community,
So true.
and values progressing in their job and remitting money back home.
Yeah, that's good. So both the countries are getting empowered because of this. So one thing I have noticed in the recent times is basically the mindset of being just an employee or like working somewhere is changing a lot in the communities, and you would have noticed that as
Mm.
well.
Mm.
They want to be entrepreneurs, and they want to do local businesses. You mentioned about big names, but I'm talking about the not so big names, but even the normal students who are coming up, and you deal with a lot of students as well. Do you see that happening at all? I mean, or do you think there's a change in the ways the people are? I mean, the students are thinking that they're more like building businesses rather than
Yeah,
just being employees
yeah.
somewhere.
So I think it's if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at
Hmm.
the very bottom is you need roti kapra aur makan.
True.
And if you are the first wave of immigrants, not just Indians, but Afghani immigrants, Syrian immigrants,
Hmm.
whoever it is, that's all you care about for one generation. You need to learn English, you need to integrate, you need to put a roof over your head. And then once you progress, you're able to take those risks,
Hmm.
because to want to be self-employed or to start a business means that you have to take risks, means you have to be comfortable with the fact that yes, there could be a big upside, but there could be a very big downside as well.
So true. So
And
true.
especially if you're here on a particular visa, you need to be comfortable taking that risk on, despite having a particular visa. So I think that's definitely changed. Um, I think India generally has been more strident and confident on the world stage, which has probably helped the thought process in terms of what is possible.
Hmm.
Um, while we commend the CEOs of, let's say, MasterCard or PepsiCo or Apple or Google of being of Indian origin, the reality is they're of a certain age bracket. The reason why they're able to be CEOs there, yes, they have education, yes, they have good motivation to do, but they all left India because the opportunities were not there. So by default, they went to the UK, US, and elsewhere. Whereas
Mm.
today's generation is leaving India and making the name out of choice,
True.
particularly in that part of society where they're comfortable taking risks. Of course, that's not true for everybody because you also have lots of people in the lower income scales here. So Uber Eat drivers, Deliveroo drivers, most I see around London are of Indian background. So it's maybe not as true for them, but certainly for professionals.
So true. And even the borders are getting, faded, right? I mean, if you talk about the businesses like 20 years or but 10 years back, forget about 20 years, probably too long. Things, the way the business people were thinking, like in more like local, it's no more local now. It's a global platform, no boundaries as such. So is that also one way of looking at it, like why people are coming out and doing businesses, even if you're outside of India, you still do business with India,
Mm.
and you're still part of that economy, so which is probably the way
Yeah,
to look at it as well.
yeah.
Okay,
I
brilliant.
mean,
Yeah,
it's much easier to do business in India today than it was. So,
yeah, that's true.
for example, I remember when I was a kid going to SBI and ICICI
Taking
offices in
loans and all,
India,
yeah.
and banks weren't integrated in a computer system. So you could have bank accounts in 6 different SBIs in the same city, but they
Mm,
wouldn't know that you have accounts at different branches.
yeah.
And if you wanted to get something done, I remember my dad would need to, somebody would say, boss, you either wait several hours or if you want to get it done quicker, there's a different way.
Mm,
Um, that is all gone. So you can transact online. Um, it's easier to do a lot of the stuff in India where the low scale corruption that used to be there um, is simply. I'm not saying it's a change in cultural mindset. It's just much more about technology is there. So you
true.
simply cannot do some of those rent seeking behavior. So I
No,
think that helps.
digitalization definitely have changed a lot of things, and one of them, as you mentioned, like back then, the corruption that used to happen cannot happen today because primarily the ways of working is completely changed.
Yeah,
You cannot operate in the same way.
yeah.
So probably there's a different corruption which is happening. We don't know probably, but yeah, that's something. Okay, let's talk about EPG in terms of economic policy group. I mean, it's probably, why do you have two different organizations? That's my primary question. Like Bridge India is one of them, but is EPG's primary goal is completely different, or is it more like connected to with the governments?
So EPG is the business side of my working life, and then there's 2 or 3 charitable things that I do. So Bridge
Okay,
India is the charity,
okay,
which I started, but I sit on the advisory board now. And then we have some trustees, and we have another advisory board.
mm,
Uh, but Bridge India is the kind of the billable work,
okay,
if I can put it that way.
okay,
And then I sit on the board of a education charity
mm,
called Stir Education, which has been doing amazing work in Indonesia, Uganda, India,
okay,
and elsewhere as well. And then there's 2 or 3 other charitable things I'm involved in to do with leprosy and other
mm,
other avenues. But EPG is mainly focused on helping British companies with their market entry into India.
okay, okay, makes
So a
sense.
typical client would be somebody who um, has a particular product to sell or has a particular idea, and
Mm-hmm.
they would like to go into the Indian market to find a joint venture partner, or they want to move the supply chain partly to India. So they need to
Mm-hmm.
create a whole supply chain, and that involves partly public affairs work, so
Okay,
interfacing with state government. Partly they'll be finding a JV partner, doing due diligence of the partner, and then partly operationalizing it, so hiring people, making sure the Indian partner does what they say they're doing, things like
so
that.
you help them in consulting, you help them in the entry barriers,
Correct.
clearing entry barriers and all that stuff. Okay, but how do you do this? Like, would you work with the governments in India, or is it more like just like any other business who would just want to go and talk to their IT, or like, or the industry ministry? Is that how it works, or you have? a bit more built-in framework as such?
So it's usually larger companies like working to frameworks. If you hired a big four consulting firm or a McKinsey, there's a particular framework that you fit into. I think our clients are much more, they'll be founders or it'll be their own
Okay.
money they put into the business.
Small
So,
businesses.
so they know small businesses in less than 50 million
Okay.
turnover,
Okay.
but owner managed. So they know what they want to do. So
Okay.
they don't much care about the consulting wrapper. It's much more about I need to achieve this in 12 months because my targets are this. Um, so often there's no government interaction. If
Okay.
it's if it's let's say in the education sector or if it's a particular type of business, it might just be private sector. Um, when there's innovation or when it's a new something new that's coming into the Indian market, or when there's let's say tariffs or customs or land acquisition, things like that involved, then of course you need to interact with the government, and it's about uh, a client comes to a consultant, and we're no different, to remove a problem that they have. So they know what the problem is, and they just want you to fix it. So then your job as a consultant is to say, well, this is how we can get from A to B.
Yeah.